You started your own band, Simo, and
egotistical right out of the gate.
Yeah, right out of the gate. Named after yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, now gear wise, with Don Kelly, you were playing tellies and different kinds of amps, and I went out and saw you play a couple times, and you started out playing some boutique amps, and then
in the very beginning, yeah.
And you had, a decent sized, pedal board. And
like everybody, yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you were playing, a Telly, it was an RS Guitar Works, kind of white, Steve Cropper, Bloomfield looking Telly into a blackface deluxe reverb.
Yeah.
And there was a coily cord and there was nothing else.
Yeah. Still to this day.
Yeah. So you kind of made the switch to that.
Yeah.
But then when you went to Simo, all of a sudden you went to humbucker guitars and you started playing the Marshall thing.
Yeah.
So, what made you switch to that sound for your own band?
Well, really, it's probably just because I wanted to do something different. It had more to do with, the fact that it was a trio that, especially in the beginning, it's grown to be less and less over time. And especially like right at this moment, it's probably the least derivative that it's ever been. Because that's what happens when you're a band and you tour like we've toured and all that. But in the beginning, it was like, okay, well, we're a trio. We obviously are drawing influence from, that kind of 60s and 70s, somewhat improvisational, rock music. And so I'd always wanted to do it, I'd always been a fan. I'd always wanted to do it. And this guitar, I got right around that time. I had, from my session days, I had tons of guitars, so I had some Les Pauls and stuff like that. But then, the acquisition of my 62 335 here, this is what got me into the vintage world that has just run amok ever since now.
Yeah.
And so it was like I had this in the very beginning, once the band had been around for a minute, and like in the beginning of the group, it was some boutique Marshall kind of stuff, and then I finally like delved deep into the vintage Marshall thing, and I loved it, and it was great, and it was fun. But really, it was just because it seemed to suit what it is that we were doing. I'd always wanted to do it. I ended up getting a really great guitar, and so it just kind of was a natural evolution, as it were, And the pedal, going back to the Don Kelly thing, I started like everybody starts kind of in the modern age, and, like with the pedal board and all that kind of stuff, which I don't necessarily have anything against. I mean, I think my whole thing with equipment is that it's really important to find things that work for you, and it can be anything. It can be, the guitar. Obviously, you're playing, or the amplifier that you're playing. If stuff down there works, stuff on the floor, but it has to be that it makes sense to you, it inspires you, because most of the time, the desire, and you and I both are falling prey to this. A lot of time it has to do with you like what someone else does with something, and then you think, oh, if I get that, I'll be able to do it too, which is not true at all. Yeah. It's not at all the case. It's a lie. But the thing is that it's the exploration of equipment to find something that inspires you. And so for me, the whittling away of effects had more to do with me in that beginning of the transition period where I was doing, it was at the height of me doing sessions where I was doing many a week. There were some weeks where it would be every day and then going to Robert's at night, or whatever. And I was looking for I was hungry for connection with love of music and inspiration, And so it kind of came out of that, in that by that point, I'd already kind of gotten real simple, where it was like maybe a delay, or, maybe a overdrive, or I got really into fuzzes, old, and started with new fuzzes, and then I got into old fuzzes from the 60s and stuff. And then finally there was one night at Robert's where I just went, I'm just going to go all night like this and see what happens. And it was like the best sound I'd ever had. Like my left hand especially was not used to not having something holding it up a little bit compression wise, Yeah. So it was harder, but the sound was like, I'd close my eyes on there and I'd be like, well, this is the sound I want,
So what was the difference between going through the board and going straight to the amp? I mean, what was it that was making the tone? Did you feel like made your tone better?
I don't know. It just sounded better. Like, because first of all, I ended up turning the amp up louder than I would, because now I didn't have any boosters or something that kind of affect how loud it is, right?
Right.
So like, I ended up putting it on like 5 or 6 generally would be my normal volume down there. And then I realized, that, oh, well, if I want it to break up, if I was going to play slide or something, which I was starting to finally play slide right around this time too. I'd be like, oh, well, I realized from it being on a chair right in my ear all night, I was like, oh, well, once I get to about 5 or 6, it doesn't really get louder. It just gets more drive.
Right.
So if I wanted more drive, I just go and turn it up to 10 or turn it up to 8 or something. And then if it was, normal chicken picking wire, I'd turn it back down. If I wanted more reverb or less, I would just do it. If I picked up, in those days of playing with Don, I would usually bring a Gibson of some kind, and play it on a few songs. And, on those I would turn the treble up a little bit, So it just became, it just went wow, which transferring into the Marshall thing, I was ready for it, because it's like with those, it's all right here. It's you use your knobs,
Yeah.
You turn those amplifiers sound best when you turn them all the way up, and then you just use these, because otherwise, if you run a Marshall at like noon or 1, it's thin, and you have none of that kind of fullness. It's gone.
Yeah.
Like, you have to turn them all the way up for them to really sound like they sound. And EQ wise, the EQ on those old Marshalls, they don't really work. And so, something I learned from old timers was that in those days, a lot of time, I mean, people joke about like full scrape, Billy Gibbons or whatever.
Right.
But no, it actually, when you turn like those controls, with the exception of the bass and the presence, which I'll talk about in a minute, when you turn the treble in the middle all the way up, you're effectively taking that out of the circuit, which just makes the whole thing kind of become bigger and wider. And the bass control, if you're running through an old cabinet, you most of the time you turn it all the way off, which I know sounds kind of crazy, but in doing that, you push the mids forward, because on old Marshalls, you know, they're kind of lacking in mid range. They got a lot of low end, they got a lot of top. So if you dump the bass, all of a sudden you get this mid range that comes through. And then the presence control is really the only control that really works well on those. Where if you know, it's like if you put it at 12 o'clock, if you want it brighter, you turn it up. If you want it darker, you turn it down. And it's like, really, that's the only not. And these are all things that like old timers taught me. Yeah. And if you're running a proper old Marshall, meaning like non-master volume Plexi type, through a good old cabinet, which is a huge part of the equation, that's the settings. That'll do it. You know, and then whatever your hands sound like. What if you got? Some people got hands that are dark sounding. Some have ones that are. Some people's hands are real bright. You know, everybody's hands kind of sound different, and so it's like, and that's really true, folks. It's actually really true, because you know, you can hand someone else your instrument, and it's going to sound completely different. You know, and when you play like this, it's a lot more evident. You know, because that's the only thing that's affecting the sound, really, is your actual touch and how you know, and it forces you to play different, because now all of a sudden you've got all this nuance, you know, like how hard you fret something, how soft you fret something, where you're picking, if you're picking up here in the middle, back by the bridge, how hard you're gripping, all these things are going to affect in a major way the sound that's coming out, because you've got nothing messing with it.
Yeah.
And so it makes you a much better, I think it made me a much better musician, because then all of a sudden I was able to develop all these nuance things that are still with me, that I think that sometimes some of that stuff can get in the way of, because, you know, sometimes if you're used to, you know, kind of a more pillowy feel underneath your left hand, you're not, because the thing is that, you know, any instrument, whether new or old, you know, it's like, I always talk about like how it's like a drum, in that, you know, a great drummer, it's the way he hits it. You know, it's not, because if you hit something too hard, it's just going to choke. You're going to get a ton of attack, but there's not going to be any tone come out of it.
Right.
And if you hit it really light, you're going to get a lot of ring, you know, and then it's like, but you have this like really you have this huge range there of dynamics that all emit a different kind of sound. And guitar, piano, you know, any instrument really is like that. And guitar in particular, you know, all those things make a huge difference on what's going to come out of the amplifier, or if you're playing acoustic, what's going to come out. And, you know, and I think that, you know, a lot of times people tend to rely on things that prop them up, you know, and I think that, you know, what I always say about it is I think it's worth, any player, I think it's kind of worth trying that approach, because I think that it'll make your hands, it'll develop your hands better. That then, if you go back to effects after you do that, you can truly kind of use them in the way that they were intended, to change the color in a more drastic way, where it's like, you know, to me, it's like, if you can master kind of subtleties, subtle differences, nuances with just your hands, you can rely on other things then to make the drastic ones that you can't necessarily do. And to me, it's like, when I think of, you know, great musicians that use effects well, you know, like Daniel Lanois or Mike Campbell or David Gilmour, or you know, I mean, when I think of guys like that, it's like that's using effects to truly kind of enhance what it is that they're looking to create sonically. Yeah. You know, they're not relying on them, they're using them, which I think is kind of, in the end, the crux of technology, the curse of it at the moment, you know, because technology is meant to aid us, not for us to depend upon it, I think, you know. And I think that with guitar, I think that's an important thing, because I think that it's, if you use, it's just like anything. If you use something for a creative, in a creative way, then you're using it for what it's intended for. But if you're using it as a crutch, you're kind of holding yourself back, I think. So inevitably at the end, that's kind of what I grew through in that whole process. And it carried over into Simo with the Marshalls, because it was a natural progression,
And then you with the Marshalls, but then recently,
Yeah.
you've you've put away the Marshall, and all of a sudden your old deluxe reverb from the Don Kelly days came back.
Yeah.
So how did that happen with the band?
Well, on this last tour, a couple months ago, we just finished a really, really long tour, and we did 83 shows over the course of 5 months, and we were home like 10 days in that 5-month period. And we're leaving again to start this next leg tomorrow. And so you and anyone who's been on the road a lot, you reach a burnout point where you get, where there's a boredom that kind of creeps in.
Yeah.
And you got two choices kind of when you get to that point. You either stop and chill out,
Yeah.
or you push through it.
Yeah.
And you might actually find something on the other end of it that is worth looking into sometimes. Because sometimes, again, getting back to the notion of that, creativity and artistry and whatever, like there's a level of discomfort that I think helps, I mean, that's, this is one of those cases where it's like there's discomfort involved. You're bored, you're tired, you want to go home, whatever.
Yeah.
And that happens, So I was feeling very boxed in creatively in my own mind. And it took me a long time to...
Yeah. Because of the kind of Gibson Marshall, kind of sound that you kind of get kind of pigeonholed, and there's kind of a certain school and players that have used that sound.
Yeah, which is great. And I love it. But I was feeling a little boxed in by it. More so from my standpoint, getting on stage every night, and wanting to try and emote, where I felt like I was kind of getting in a rut, and so I thought to myself, I said, well, what would it be like if I tried a Fender amp or something with the group? Would that even work? Because I never even really tried it, because when I left Don's band, and Simo was actually our group was actually becoming like a real entity. It's like, okay, this is not a side project anymore. This is what we're doing. It was a very distinct, like, okay, I'm going to do this now. Whereas, I never experimented with it. So I was curious about it. So we got back from Europe, and I pulled it out and I brought it, and I hadn't played this guitar. I hadn't played Red for a couple of tours because of the burst, which we'll talk about in a minute, but which is, a dream freaking come true. But I hadn't played this in a minute, and I've been thinking about, my love of Michael Bloomfield, who really, I think if it comes down to it, if there had to be one for me, really, he would be it. Really, if there had to be one. And I recognize that now more, than I ever did, because part of the reason why and I know you'll relate to this because you're a huge fan of his too, and we've shared this love of him, but it's like the thing that to me evens the playing field out is that it's like he was such a great, nasty, emotive player, but it's like he played blues, he played acoustic music well, he played with Dylan, and he did all that great stuff with Bob Dylan too. So it's like it's not just one thing that he did. Like it's a pretty impressive body of work, So anyway, so and everybody's got a million influences, and I certainly do. And people like Dwayne Allman, and there are other people that are huge influences on me. But really, it's like Mike. There's a reason why he knocked me out all those years ago. So I've been thinking about the Telecaster and all that. So we got back and we had one day off before we started the next tour here in America. So I pulled the Deluxe out. I got this. I pulled out my old RS Telecaster that I hadn't played. Still had the strings on it from my last Don Kelly gig.
Whew. Yeah.
Which was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
5 years ago. And I actually got an old Showman cab from Tom Bukovac, and didn't bring the Marshalls, and because we'd been in Europe, all the equipment here wasn't loaded in the trailer or anything in cases. So when we met up to load up what we were taking on that run, I was like, well, this is what I'm bringing, and the guys and like Dylan, our sound guy and stuff, were like, what? And I was like, I'm trying something. And if I have the other stuff here, I might be tempted to not commit to it.
Yeah.
And
so you went a whole hog in and went.
Yeah. And so I tried it.
Yeah.
And man, I felt so free immediately.
Why?
I don't know. But I just felt so inspired because what I was hearing was something I wasn't used to hearing. Yeah. Like what was coming out of there was so different than what I was used to. It spawned me to play differently. It spawned me to think differently.
Yeah.
It spawned me to explore more than I had in a really long time. And so I committed wholeheartedly because I got off the stage that night. It was the first show was in Louisville. And I was so inspired by it. And I have to admit, there's also, I think everything kind of goes in cycles. I mean, life is nothing but cycles.
Yeah.
And it's us deciding, I think, how much we want to learn or garner from each cycle of our life, So for me, it was very much kind of going, well, it's a full circle moment for me because, when I got this guitar, it changed my life. And it's like, and this amplifier changed my life back then. And this was my friend that I relied on every night and every day for years, Yeah. And it's like, I don't know a piece of gear as well as I know this amplifier. Like, I know this amp. And then bringing it into this context that now I've grown very comfortable with, and grown, with my bandmates, it's been a very, very healthy transition. And it also, it's come at a very poignant time.
Yeah.
In our band's history, I will say.
Because you're about to make another record.
We are. We're just starting the process of, this record is going to be very different from anything we've ever done because we're essentially going to make it over a very long period of time. And, we're very dead set on making a crafted record this time, which is something that I'm finally ready to do because we've made records. Now we've made 2 records, but really the first one we just made just to get going. Like this record that is out now is like the first record that actually like charted and that, most people are becoming aware of us because of it. Mm-hmm. And, it's a performance. It's an unadulterated, unedited, unmessed with performance, which I think is a great way to kind of like start this, if people's exposure to us as a group, because we're not hiding behind anything.
Right. There's nothing to hide behind.
Exactly. Which was by design a little bit. So now it's, we're, you can't, just like what we're talking about with the Don Kelly gigs and all those sessions, you can't, the learning process never stops and the refining process never stops unless you stop it or stop wanting to grow. And so for us as a group, we've really, the elements of who and what we've been are definitely, they're still there, but they're much, much more refined now because we've played so many gigs. It's just, when you road dog it that hard, you start trimming away the fat, and so all the things that maybe were kind of holding us in a more derivative place have continued to kind of shed. And like now the focus is much more on writing and much more on, trying to do something, trying to push ourselves to do something that's ahead of it, which is how it should be, I think.
So who's producing this?
I don't want to say on camera yet because we haven't started, but
okay.
But it's an old friend. It's an old friend of mine who plays a significant part in my story.
Okay.
And
that's fair enough.
Yeah, because I just But we are, really it's there. I think the big thing to say is we are using a producer this time, because I produced the last record, and man, I don't have it in me right now to do that, because I didn't realize how hard it really is to do until I did it myself. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard to do both. I think that I'll definitely want another crack at it at another point, and I can definitely see where it would be much easier to produce someone else, because I like making records and I like making music, and I enjoy the process a lot, and have had a lot of experience making records and stuff. But yeah, this time around, there's just all the things that I want improved and want to be pushed are things that are things I can't do. Yeah. And so the realization from all three of us in the band, has been, that's the biggest change this time around. And we're going to work in a real recording studio this time, which I'd been hesitant to and neglected in the past because I wanted to do something else for a minute. Yeah. But I think that that's kind of the lasting lesson, is that life is, you get to a certain point and you want to try something different, you want to grow, and you can either keep doing the same thing, or you have these moments where you go, okay, I'm going to push through and get to the other side. Just to back up on the amp, just to revisit it one more time. The amp's got a vintage 30 in it. Yeah, which is the only speaker I've ever played through. Well, that's not true, because in the very, very beginning of the Don, like you said, in the very, very beginning, like the first 2 months of the band, of me subbing in the band, I had some boutique amplifiers. Yeah. And then I got my first deluxe reverb. I actually bought it in Austin, Texas, because I went down there to go see Red Volkart play. Yeah. Right when I think it was when I got the gig officially, is when my now wife and I went to Austin for a little vacation, because I wanted to see Red play. Yeah. Because I was trying to learn. Yeah. And I went to Austin Vintage Guitar in the original location, which is now a condo place in Austin. And I bought a Silverface one that had this speaker in it. Yeah. And then played that for a minute. It was okay. It wasn't great. And then I got my first Blackface Deluxe that I played for a little while, and I put that speaker in there, the speaker in there. And then eventually, I think probably around the 1 year mark is when I found this particular Deluxe, which is a very, very special sounding one. And I put that speaker in here, and it's been in there ever since. And it's, it's something that you can't, the amount of air that's been pumped through that thing is just, it makes a sound that's fairly, I think, unique. Absolutely. So now with Simo, going from the 100-watt Marshall to the 22-watt Deluxe. Yeah. So how, that's going to make a huge difference in your stage volume and how you play together. So how is that changed the way you play? It hasn't really changed the way we play. Okay. Because we still play the same, essentially, the way that we react to one another. Okay. I think that, obviously the stage volumes come way down. But the thing is that it came down in increments, because it started with the 100-watt, and then I went to 50 watters for a minute, and then I went to 100, eventually settled on 100 with 2 tubes pulled, which is like a little more than 50 watts, but definitely spongier and a very different experience than all 4 tubes.
Right.
And 1 cab or 2 cabs makes a huge difference too. But it's like so it was like incrementally going down. And then I got into these old Traynor amplifiers from the 70s.
Yeah.
And on the beginning of this tour, there were certain nights where just because it was starting to kind of happen, the desire to do something different. But I didn't like it really when I was in Europe is when it really kind of like, this is what I'm going to do. So, but for some of those gigs, I used the Traynor, which is just this little 20-watt 112 combo as well, which are funky and I love them. And I actually used it on our record that is out now. But but now with this, it's really, I mean, the stage volume's really come down. Alod plays an old Tuck and Roll custom amp, which is like not even 100 watts, but it's real farty and, and he plays an old 66 P bass with flat wounds on it and like has a real unique sound. And Adam has his old Ludwigs that are tuned really open and really jazz sounding, and his cymbals are a mixture of old and new that are really dry and don't have a ton of time. So really, I think what's really happened is now everybody's sitting in their frequency range more, because with the Marshall I had so much low end going on that like I don't really like, the volume has come down, but the sonic, the frequency range thing is the thing that's changed the most, because it's like now that all that low mid and low end from me is gone, and I'm sitting up here where I'm supposed to be. It's like all of a sudden, like the drums were able to get a little bigger, the bass was able to get bigger, like the whole sound was able to kind of meld more.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the biggest difference, I would say, is that it's just now frequency range wise, it's everything's sitting where it should be. And I also should note that I've been using lately, in addition to this deluxe reverb, I've scored an old Epiphone Futura amp, which is the amplifier that Michael Bloomfield used at Newport with Dylan, and he also used it with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And I found an original one of those, and those are rare amps to find. And if you find one, don't buy it, because I'm going to buy it. Because they rarely come up for sale, the right ones. There's 2 different versions of it, but there's the earlier one with the 7591s in it. That's the one Michael used. And it looks like an old hi-fi system. It's big. It's a big amplifier.
Yeah.
But it's not that loud, and it sounds horrible in a great way. And there's no pedal in the world that could sound like that amplifier, because it's got 4 8-inch speakers in it. And it's got this, it's basically like if anybody knows what a Gibson Falcon amp is, it's basically like a little bit of a blown up Falcon. Yeah. And so anyway, I got that recently, and I've been using that in conjunction with the Deluxe at the same time. But then like at the front of house, Dylan, our sound guy, for things that are kind of heavier or riffier, he'll favor the Epiphone, because the Epiphone it's got so much compression that it sounds like the amp's just caving in on itself. Yeah. And again, it almost sounds like a fuzz or something, but like there's no pedal that could really kind of mimic this. So it's like, but those together make a very interesting, unique kind of sound. And so I'm really into that at the moment. And I think I'm probably going to continue to explore that, because I really, there's all these weird old amplifiers from the 50s and 60s that nobody seems to kind of want these days. And they seem to all be, I run into them out there and on the road and stuff, and they seem to all be like $300, $400, $500. And I'm a tweaker to the nth degree, and Alod, the bassist in the group, is even more so. Like, I mean, Alod could make you a boutique amp if you wanted him to. Like, he's insane. So like, yeah, stress relief for us is, oh man, look at this cool thing, and then take it back to the hotel room and make it work. Yeah. That's like something we do. So
a cap job and
seriously, like in a hotel room. So so I'm really into that. So the Epiphone is definitely something I'm really, really digging. I'd always wanted one, because it's you know, and it's unique sounding. Yeah. So anyway.
So moving on to guitars. So So tell us about this 62-335. Now, you've had this, for a number of years, and Gibson has even started. They're going to make a limited run copy of that guitar.
Well, yeah, no, there's two different things. There's the limited custom shop model came out earlier this year and sold out like immediately. Like I had to fight to get mine, like because we were just going to make a couple of dozen of them,
right?
But they sold really quick, and so I mean, I think really it's just because they made the one that I have is amazing. Like it's great. Like I used it most of this last tour actually, because it's so great. So I mean, I don't think I had anything to do with it. They were just great guitars,
Yeah.
But what we're doing now is the Memphis division is going to come out with a production model that isn't aged.
Okay.
That is going to be in a relatively normal kind of price point, I think. And I just went back to them with my little bit of revisions on the prototype they made of that, and that'll probably come, I don't know, maybe later this year, maybe early next year, I don't know, but we're doing that, which will be a lot more instruments than the initial run. But this guitar, it's the guitar that changed my life, in that I'd never really had that much exposure to vintage instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine had owned this for like 30 years, and it had a Bigsby on it, had a pickguard on it. I've since taken the pickguard off because I actually have found that I like playing like this, with my hand like this, and the pickguard gets in my way, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So the pickguard's been off for a little while now, but I had a pickguard, had the Bigsby, and I played it for the first time in that state, and it was a great guitar. But then he took the Bigsby off, and he put this stop tail on there, and it just became an amazing guitar. And I sold everything I had of worth, like all of my session guitars, all the extra amplifiers that I'd amassed. Gosh, man, I mean, I was eBaying old guitar magazines and stuff, to get all the money together to get there, because I spent more money on this than I've ever spent on anything.
Yeah.
I mean, my car wasn't even worth as much as that. So, but it was the greatest thing I ever did, because this thing it changed my life, and then kind of opened myself up into this vintage world of all these mystical guys that live in this country that love this stuff. And they're some of the most gracious, kind guys I've ever met, that just are crazy about old gear. And so, bit by bit, I've played some amazing stuff. I mean, really, there isn't anything I can think of I haven't had a chance to play many, many of at this point. And that's something that, it just happened because of friendships and relationships, But this guitar is what started all that. And to this day, I think that, much like that amplifier is like the amplifier I know. It's like, even when I haven't played this for a few months or something, and I come back to it, it's like the initial connection I made with it years ago. It's still that, where it's like I know exactly what parts of the neck are going to do certain things, and I know this instrument really well. And I'm really grateful, because connection with a single instrument is rare these days, because there's so much, but it's like, if you can feel comfortable, and it's like, at the end of the day, I mean, as we'll see, I mean, I'm beyond spoiled. It's amazing the stuff I get to play, but this thing is really all I'd ever need, and I'm grateful. So yeah, good old Red.
Good old Red. Well, let's hear you play a little bit of it.
Sounds good.